The dust hadn't settled from the stampede when Sarah McKenna found herself pinned against the canyon wall, her rifle lost somewhere in the chaos, staring into the dark eyes of the Apache warrior everyone called Ghost, her heart hammered against her ribs. Not entirely from fear, though fear was certainly part of it. 3 of her father's ranch hands lay dead in the ravine below, victims of what the territorial governor was calling an Indian uprising. Though Sarah suspected the truth was far more complicated, the Apache had her cornered, his hand raised, and she could see the battle scars that traced along his bronzed forearm like a map of violence. But what struck her most was the expression on his face, not rage or hatred, but something that looked almost like recognition. "Will you stop if I ask?" The words tumbled out of her mouth before her mind could catch up with her tongue. It wasn't the plea for mercy she'd intended. It was something else entirely, a challenge wrapped in a question, the kind of thing her mother used to say made her too headstrong for her own good. The Apache warrior's hand froze mid-motion, his obsidian eyes widening with what might have been surprise. Around them, the sounds of continuing conflict echoed off the red rock wall's gunfire, shouting, the terrified lowing of scattered cattle. But in that moment, in the space between Sarah and this man whose people were supposedly her enemies, everything went silent. He lowered his hand slowly, tilting his head as he studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. When he spoke, his English was clear and precise, colored with an accent that suggested someone had taught him carefully. "You asked me to stop?" There was curiosity in his voice, not mockery. "Your people do not ask. They demand, or they shoot, or they run. But you ask?" He took a step back, giving her space to breathe, though she noticed he positioned himself between her and the path down to where her father's men had fallen. "I'm called Apache by your people, though that is not my name. And yes, I will stop if you ask. But first, you must answer me this. Will you listen if I speak?" Sarah's practical nature warred with her instinct for self-preservation. Everything she'd been taught said you couldn't trust an Apache, that they were savages who killed without reason, that the only good Indian was a dead Indian. But her father, before he'd grown bitter in heart after her mother's death, had taught her something else too, that every man deserved to be judged by his own actions, not by the color of his skin or the circumstances of his birth. She looked at this warrior, this man they called Ghost, and saw something in his eyes that reminded her of her father in his better days, a deep weariness, the kind that came from seeing too much death, from fighting battles that seemed to have no end. "I'll listen," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "But my father will come looking for me. And when he does, he'll bring every armed man in the territory." Apache nodded slowly, as if he'd expected nothing less. "Your father, James McKenna, is a man of honor, even if he does not see us as human. But the men who rode with you today, the ones who drove the cattle through the sacred springs, who burned the shelters where our children sleep, these men are not your father's men. They wear different brands, speak with different tongues. They want war between your people and mine, and they do not care how many die to profit from it." He gestured toward the ravine, toward the bodies of the fallen ranch hands. "Those men died because they discovered the truth. I did not kill them, though my hands are not clean of your people's blood. Others did this, and they will let my people take the blame." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. She'd questioned the new crew her father had hired after the winter losses. Rough men from back east who seemed more interested in stirring up trouble than honest ranch work. Her father had been distracted, drowning his grief in whiskey and rage, and she'd been trying to hold the McKenna ranch together with determination and stubborn pride. "You're saying someone's trying to start a range war? Using your people as scapegoats?" "Your words for it are different than mine. But yes," Apache's expression remained guarded, but she could see the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "There are men who want this land, who see profit in our blood and yours. They whisper poison in the ears of the territorial governor, sell weapons to both sides, and wait for us to destroy each other. I have been tracking them for 3 moons, gathering proof, but no one will listen to an Apache's testimony. Your courts do not see us as men who can speak truth." The weight of his words settled over Sarah like a physical thing. She thought of the recent attacks. The pattern that hadn't quite made sense: homesteads hit but not robbed. Travelers killed but their goods left behind, violence that seemed designed to provoke rather than profit. If what you're saying is true, why should I trust you? You admitted your hands aren't clean. How many of my people have you killed? Apache met her gaze without flinching. Too many. More than my spirit can carry with ease. I have taken lives in battle, in defense of my people, in raids for horses and food when your government's reservations starved us. I do not ask for your forgiveness, for I cannot forgive myself. But I am tired of death, tired of seeing children, both mine and yours, grow up knowing only fear and hatred. So I make you this promise, Sarah McKenna. He spoke her name as if he'd known it all along, and perhaps he had. If you help me expose the men who profit from this war, I will stop. I will lay down my weapons and convince my brothers to do the same. I will speak for peace, even though it may cost me everything among my own people. Why would you make such a promise to me? Sarah asked, genuinely bewildered. You don't know me. I could betray you the moment I'm free. For the first time, something like a smile flickered across Apache's stern features. Because 3 summers ago, a white girl gave water to an Apache boy dying of thirst on the edge of your father's land. She asked no questions, demanded no payment, simply gave what was needed and asked him to live. That boy was my youngest brother. He still lives, and he still speaks of the angel with sun-colored hair who saved him when she had every reason to let him die. Apache's eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I know exactly who you are, Sarah McKenna. And I am betting both our futures that you are still the woman who believes in mercy, even when mercy is dangerous. Sarah remembered that day the young Apache boy collapsed by the creek, so dehydrated he could barely speak. She'd given him water, some dried meat, and sent him on his way with a canteen, never telling her father, knowing he'd be furious. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, hardly worth remembering. But here it was, coming back to her in the form of a promise from a warrior who held her life in his hands and chose to offer her partnership instead of death. If I help you, she said slowly, working through the complications even as she spoke, it won't be easy. My father won't listen to me about this, not in his current state. The townspeople already think I'm too willful, too independent. And if anyone discovers I'm working with an Apache, they'll call me a traitor or worse. I know what I am asking, Apache replied quietly. I am asking you to risk everything, your reputation, your safety, perhaps your life. I am asking you to trust a man whose people are at war with yours, whose culture you do not fully understand, whose motives you have every reason to doubt. It is not a small thing I request, and I would not blame you for refusing. Sarah looked down at the ravine where the dead men lay, then back at Apache, at the weariness and hope warring in his expression. She thought about the future that stretched ahead if nothing changed, more death, more hatred, more children growing up knowing only fear. She thought about her mother, who'd always said that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to do what was right despite it. And she thought about the young boy she'd saved, now grown, now fighting a war that seemed to have no end. I'll help you, she said, and felt the words change something fundamental in the air between them. But I need your promise, Apache. Not just that you'll stop fighting, but that you'll protect innocent people while we're working together. That you won't let your people attack civilians and that you'll truly commit to peace if we succeed. Apache extended his hand in the white man's gesture of agreement, and after only a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it. His grip was firm and warm, calloused from years of hard living, but gentle enough to remind her that strength didn't require brutality. You have my promise, given in the sight of the sky and the earth, which are witnesses to all oaths. I will be your ally in this, Sarah McKenna, and I will not betray your trust unless you first betray mine. As they stood there, hands clasped, the sounds of the continuing conflict seemed to fade into insignificance. Sarah knew she'd just made a choice that would change everything, that would set her on a path with no clear ending and dangers she couldn't yet imagine. But looking into Apache's eyes, seeing the sincerity and determination there, she felt something unexpected bloom in her chest, not just trust, but hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to stop the bloodshed. Maybe this warrior's promise would be the beginning of something better than endless war. We should move, Apache said, releasing her hand and scanning the canyon walls with practiced efficiency. The men who killed your father's hands will come to make sure no witnesses survive. There is a place hidden where we can speak safely and plan our next moves. Will you come with me?" Sarah took a deep breath, aware that once she left this canyon with Apache, there would be no going back to her old life, to the simple certainties she'd known before. But those certainties had been built on lies and half-truths, on hatred passed down through generations like cursed heirlooms. It was time to find new truths, even if they were dangerous. "Lead the way," she said, and followed the Apache warrior into the wilderness, trusting a promise from a man who was supposed to be her enemy, betting everything on the hope that mercy could be stronger than hatred, that peace could be won by two people willing to risk everything for it. The hidden canyon Apache led her to was nothing like Sarah had imagined an Apache hideout would be. She'd expected something crude and temporary, but instead found herself in a sheltered box canyon with a clear spring, careful arrangements of stones for cooking, and even what looked like a small garden of corn and squash growing in the protected southern exposure. It spoke of permanence, of people trying to build lives rather than simply wage war. As they descended the narrow trail, Sarah noticed Apache's posture change subtly. He was still alert, but some of the battle tension had left his shoulders. This was his sanctuary, and he was bringing her into it. The trust that implied wasn't lost on her. "Wait here," Apache said when they reached the canyon floor, gesturing to a smooth boulder near the spring. "I must tell my people that you come as a guest under my protection. Otherwise, they may react with fear or anger, and I would not have you harmed after you have shown such courage in trusting me." He paused, his dark eyes searching her face. "Are you afraid?" Sarah considered lying, then decided honesty would serve them both better. "Terrified," she admitted. "But not of being killed, if that's what you're asking? I'm afraid of failing, of not being able to stop what's coming, of discovering that even good intentions can't bridge the gap between our peoples. I'm afraid that we're too late, and too few, and too powerless against forces much larger than ourselves." Apache's expression softened, and for a moment she saw not the fierce warrior, but simply a man carrying too many burdens. Fear is wisdom when it teaches us to prepare, to think clearly, to move with care. It is only weakness when it stops us from acting at all. You have not let fear stop you, so I think you are stronger than you know. Sarah McKenna. He turned toward the cluster of shelters at the far end of the canyon, then looked back. "My true name is Nalnish. It means, he who works in the tongue of my people. I tell you this because names have power, and I give you power over me by sharing mine. You may continue to call me Apache if you prefer, but know that Nalnish is who I am when I am not at war." Before Sarah could respond, he strode away toward the shelters, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. She watched him go, turning the name over in her mind. Nalnish, it suited him better than the generic Apache, gave him individuality and humanity. She wondered what it said about her people that they rarely bothered to learn the real names of those they fought, preferring to lump everyone together under broad, impersonal labels. The wait stretched long enough that Sarah's nerves began to fray at the edges. She could hear voices from the shelters, some raised in what sounded like argument, though she couldn't make out words. She forced herself to remain seated, to project calm even though every instinct screamed at her to run, to get back to familiar territory before this insane gamble collapsed around her. What was she doing here? She was a rancher's daughter, skilled with horses and cattle and accounting books, not some kind of peacemaker or spy. The gap between her abilities and the task ahead yawned like a chasm. When Nalnish finally returned, he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, perhaps 10 years older than Sarah, with striking features and eyes that seemed to see straight through to the truth of things. She wore traditional Apache clothing but carried herself with an authority that needed no symbols of rank to be evident. Behind them came an older man, weathered and lean, with silver threading through his long dark hair, and the kind of stillness that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "This is my sister, Ishta," Nalnish said, gesturing to the woman. "And this is Standing Bear, who speaks for our band when wisdom is needed more than war. They wish to hear from your own mouth why you have come and what you truly seek." Sarah stood, resisting the urge to brush dust from her split riding skirt. She met Ishta's penetrating gaze directly, the way her father had taught her to face difficult cattle buyers, with respect but without submission. I came because your brother showed me that the war between our peoples serves someone else's profit, not our people's needs. I came because I'm tired of death and hatred, and because I believe we've been manipulated into fighting while others grow rich on our blood. I came because Nalnish made me a promise and I chose to trust it. Ishta's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that might have been approval. My brother says you gave water to our youngest 3 summers past, that you showed mercy when you had no reason to do so. Is this true? It is. I found a boy dying of thirst on my father's land. I gave him water and food and sent him on his way. It seemed like the right thing to do. Sarah kept her voice steady, refusing to apologize for an act of basic human decency. The right thing, Standing Bear repeated, speaking for the first time. His English was heavily accented but clear, his voice carrying the weight of many winters. Your people often speak of right things, yet seldom do them when the right thing conflicts with profit or pride. Why should we believe you are different? It was a fair question, one Sarah had asked herself repeatedly during the journey to this canyon. You shouldn't believe it just because I say it, she answered honestly. Judge me by my actions, not my words. I'm here, aren't I? In an Apache camp alone, knowing my own people would call me a traitor for it. I'm risking everything on the chance that we can expose the men who profit from our war. That should count for something. Standing Bear studied her for a long moment, then surprised her by smiling, the expression transforming his weathered face. You speak with the directness of one who knows her own mind. This is good. Pretty words and soft promises would have told us you were false. Nalnish has chosen his ally well. He turned to Ishta. What say you, daughter of my heart? Can we trust this white woman with our secrets and our safety? Ishta circled Sarah slowly, looking her up and down as if assessing a horse for purchase. Sarah bore the scrutiny without flinching, though it took effort. Finally, Ishta nodded. She has honest eyes and a spine of iron. These are qualities we need. But I will watch her closely, brother, and if she betrays us, her death will be mine to deliver. Fair enough, Sarah said, meeting Ishta's eyes again. I'd expect nothing less. But know this, if you betray me, if you use what I'm about to help you with to harm innocent people, I'll find a way to stop you or die trying. We're building trust on both sides here, and it has to run both ways. Nalnish looked between the 3 of them, and Sarah saw satisfaction in his expression. Then we are agreed. Sarah McKenna stands with us as ally and partner in this venture. Now we must speak of practical matters. Sarah, what do you know of the new men who work for your father? Sarah settled back onto the boulder, grateful to move past the testing phase and into action. They came after the winter losses when my father was desperate for help. A man named Sutton brought them, said they were experienced ranch hands from back east looking for work in the territories. But they don't work like ranch hands. They're too comfortable with guns, too quick to violence, too interested in stirring up trouble with Apache bands. I questioned it, but my father, she hesitated, loyalty warring with honesty. Your father drinks to drown his grief, Ishta said bluntly. We know this. We see much that your people think is hidden. Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but nodded. Yes, since my mother died, he's been a different man, harder, angrier, less careful about who he trusts. These new men, they feed his rage, encourage him to see every Apache as responsible for every bad thing that happens. They talk about clearing the territory, about showing the Indians who's boss. It makes me sick to hear it, but I'm just his daughter. He doesn't listen to me anymore. This Sutton, Nalnish said, crouching beside her so they were at eye level. Describe him to me. Tall, heavy-set, with a scar across his left cheek. He wears good clothes, too good for a ranch foreman, and carries a silver-plated revolver. He speaks like an educated man, but there's something cold about him, like he's calculating profit in every conversation. He meets with other men sometimes, away from the main ranch. I've tried to follow, but he's cautious, and my father would be furious if he caught me spying. Standing Bear and Nalnish exchanged significant looks. We know this man, Standing Bear said grimly. He has another name among the white settlements to the east. Sutton is what he calls himself here, but we have heard him called Merrick in other places. He moves from territory to territory, always appearing where there is conflict between white settlers and native peoples. Where he goes, bloodshed follows, and afterward land changes hands to mysterious buyers from back east. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind, forming a picture that made her stomach churn. He's done this before? Started wars to profit from the aftermath? 3 times that we know of, Nalnish confirmed. Once to the north, where the Lakota lost sacred lands after a series of attacks blamed on them. Once to the east, where Cherokee families were driven from good farming land after their village was accused of harboring murderers. And now here, in our territory, where the land is rich and the government grows tired of honoring old treaties. Sutton, or Merrick, or whatever he truly calls himself, is a man who understands that war makes some men very rich while others die. He has no loyalty to white or Apache, only to gold. Sarah felt anger rise hot in her chest. My father's men died to serve this monster's greed. He's using our ranch, our name, to justify murder and theft. And my father's too blind with grief and whiskey to see it. The bitterness in her voice surprised her, but she didn't try to hide it. These people deserved her honesty, even when it exposed her family's weakness. Ishta sat down on Sarah's other side, her presence somehow both comforting and challenging. Grief makes fools of wise men and monsters of good ones? Your father was known as fair-minded once, before sorrow broke something inside him. This Sutton saw the breaking and used it, as parasites use wounded animals. You should not carry shame for your father's pain. The unexpected kindness nearly undid Sarah's composure. She blinked hard against the sudden sting of tears. What do? How do we prove what Sutton's doing and stop him before more people die? Nalnish pulled a leather pouch from his belt and opened it carefully, revealing papers covered in writing, along with what looked like fragments of letters and bills of sale. I have been gathering evidence for Moon's papers I took from dead men's pockets, documents stolen from camps, records of meetings between Sutton and other men who profit from conflict, but these mean nothing if brought forward by an Apache. Your courts will call them forgeries, say I created them to escape justice for my people's raids? The evidence needs to come from a white person, someone with standing in the community, someone whose word cannot be easily dismissed. Someone like a respected rancher's daughter, Sarah said slowly, understanding dawning. If I bring this evidence forward, if I testify about what I've seen and what you've told me, it carries weight that your testimony never could. It's not fair, but it's true. Justice and fairness are not always the same thing, Standing Bear observed. We use the tools we have, not the tools we wish we had. You are a tool we need, Sarah McKenna, and we are tools you need as well. Together, perhaps we can build something that resembles justice, even if it is not perfectly fair. Sarah looked at the papers Nalnish held, evidence of conspiracy and murder, proof that could save lives or get her killed depending on how she handled it. What about the territorial governor? Could we bring this to him? Nalnish's expression darkened. The governor is either part of the conspiracy or willfully blind to it. He has refused to meet with Apache leaders, refused to investigate attacks on our people, refused to acknowledge any possibility that white settlers might be lying about our actions. He speaks only of removing us from this land, of opening it for white settlement and mining. Either Sutton has bought him or the governor's own greed makes him an ally to this plan. Then we go around him, Sarah said, thinking rapidly. There's a federal marshal, Morrison, who came through last year investigating some other matter. He seemed like an honest man, not easily swayed by local politics. If we could get word to him, present him with evidence he couldn't ignore, a federal marshal would have authority over the territorial governor, Ishta said thoughtfully. This could work if the marshal is truly as honest as you believe. But Sutton will not sit idle while we build a case against him. The moment he suspects we are working together, he will move to eliminate us both. You most of all, Sarah McKenna, for you are the greater threat to his plans. An Apache warrior working against him is expected, easily dismissed, but a white woman of good family exposing his crimes. That he cannot allow. The weight of danger settled over Sarah like a physical thing. She'd understood abstractly that this path would be perilous, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Sutton wouldn't hesitate to kill her if he discovered what she was doing. He'd probably make it look like an Apache raid, add her death to the list of crimes he blamed on Nalnish's people, use her murder to further inflame the hatred that served his purposes. Then we'll have to be very careful, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. And we'll need to move quickly before Sutton realizes what we're doing. How long before the marshal could be contacted? Nalnish considered. The nearest telegraph station is in Silver Creek, 3 days' hard ride from here. If we could get a message to the marshal's office, he might arrive within 2 weeks, perhaps less if he considers the matter urgent. But you cannot simply disappear for 3 days without your father raising an alarm. And I cannot ride into Silver Creek without being shot on sight. I can go, Sarah said immediately. I'll tell my father I'm visiting the Morrison Ranch. Mrs. Morrison has been trying to get me to visit for months. And it's in the general direction of Silver Creek. I can make the detour, send the telegraph, and be back before anyone realizes I went off course. Alone? Ishta's tone made it clear what she thought of that plan. Sutton's men patrol these lands. If they find you alone, far from your father's ranch, they will know you are up to something. They may kill you simply to prevent whatever you are planning. Then I won't go alone, Sarah said, looking at Nalnish. You'll come with me, staying out of sight, but close enough to help if there's trouble? We're partners in this, aren't we? We should act like it. The silence that followed her suggestion was heavy with implications. A white woman and an Apache warrior traveling together through hostile territory, depending on each other for safety and success. It was scandalous, dangerous, and possibly insane. It was also, Sarah realized, exactly the kind of concrete demonstration of trust that could either forge an unbreakable alliance or destroy them both. Nalnish's slow smile was answer enough. You are either very brave or very foolish, Sarah McKenna, perhaps both. Yes, I will ride with you, keep you safe from ambush, and ensure you reach Silver Creek to send your message. And in return, you will help my people understand that not all white settlers are enemies. That peace is possible if we are willing to fight for it together. They left before dawn, Sarah on her steady marae and Nalnish running alongside on foot with the tireless endurance that Apache warriors were famous for. She'd argued that they should take 2 horses, but he'd refused, explaining that a riderless horse would raise questions if they were spotted, and his ability to move on foot through rough terrain gave them advantages a horse couldn't match. Watching him cover ground with seemingly effortless grace, Sarah had to concede he was right. He moved like part of the landscape itself, reading signs in the earth and air that she couldn't even perceive, keeping them away from well-traveled paths and potential dangers. The first day passed without incident, though Sarah's nerves were strung tight as wire. Every distant dust cloud might be Sutton's men, every sound could herald discovery and violence. But Nalnish seemed to possess an almost supernatural awareness of their surroundings, steering them around danger before it materialized. They spoke little during the day, saving their breath for travel, but when they camped that night in a hidden arroyo, Sarah found herself hungry for conversation, for connection with this complicated man who'd become her unlikely partner. "Tell me about your family," she said as they sat by a carefully shielded fire, eating the dried meat and cornbread she'd brought from the ranch. "Ishta is your sister, but you mentioned a youngest brother as well. Are there others?" Nalnish was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "There were 7 of us once. 3 brothers, 4 sisters. Now there are 3 Ishta, my youngest brother Kadlo, and myself. The others died in various ways that all trace back to the same source, the clash between our peoples. One brother fell in a cavalry raid on our village. 2 sisters died of the spotted sickness that came from the white man's blankets at the reservation. My eldest sister was killed trying to protect her children when soldiers came to force us onto reservation lands. They shot her and took the children anyway, sent them to a school far away where they were forbidden to speak our language or practice our ways. I do not know if they still live." The casual recitation of horrors left Sarah speechless. She'd known abstractly that Apache families suffered losses, but hearing it laid out so plainly, understanding that this strong, capable man had been torn apart by grief just as her father had been, made it devastatingly real. "I'm sorry," she whispered, knowing the words were inadequate but needing to say them anyway. "And you?" Nalnish asked, turning the question back on her. "You speak of your father and your mother who died, but you have mentioned no siblings, no husband waiting for your return." "I'm alone," Sarah said simply. I had a younger brother, but he died when he was just a baby, some kind of fever the doctor couldn't cure. After that, my mother couldn't have more children. It was just the three of us, and we were happy despite being a small family. My father taught me everything about running the ranch because he had no son to inherit it. My mother taught me to read and write and think for myself, which scandalized the other ranchers' wives. She smiled slightly at the memory. Mother said she didn't raise me to be decorative, she raised me to be formidable. She succeeded, Nalnish observed, a hint of warmth in his tone. You are quite formidable, Sarah McKenna. I have known warriors with less courage than you show. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. I don't feel courageous. I feel terrified most of the time. But my mother also taught me that fear is just information, not instruction. It tells you what matters and what the stakes are, but it shouldn't tell you what to do. Your mother was wise? I would have liked to know her. Nalnish poked at the fire with a stick, sending small sparks spiraling into the night sky. My mother taught me that hatred is easier than understanding, but that easy paths often lead to hard endings. She said that courage was choosing the difficult path because it led somewhere worth going. I think our mothers would have agreed on many things. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared loss and shared values that transcended the vast cultural divide between them. What was her name? Your mother? Kai, Nalnish said softly. It means willow tree because she was graceful and strong and could bend without breaking. She died defending our village from an attack. Wielding a rifle she barely knew how to use because the warriors were away and the women and elders were alone. She bought enough time for many to escape before she fell. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in memories of the dead who shaped them. Finally, Sarah spoke again. When this is over, if we succeed in exposing Sutton and stopping the war he's creating, what will you do? Where will you go? Nalnish looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I do not know if there is a place for me in a world at peace. I have been a warrior for so long, fought so many battles, that I am not certain who I am without war to define me. Perhaps I will find out if we live long enough to see peace. He paused, then asked, And you? What does Sarah McKenna want from a future without conflict? It was a question she'd asked herself many times during sleepless nights at the ranch. I want to raise good cattle, run an honest operation, maybe prove that a woman can manage a ranch as well as any man. I want to honor my mother's memory by being the formidable woman she raised me to be. And maybe, if I'm very fortunate, I want to help build a world where people like you and me don't have to be enemies just because our skin is different colors. That is a good dream, Nalnish said quietly. Worth fighting for. Worth the risk we are taking. The second day brought their first real test. They were skirting the edge of a mesa when Nalnish suddenly froze. His hand coming up in a gesture that Sarah had learned meant immediate danger. She reined in her Mari instantly, her heart leaping into her throat. Nalnish pointed silently toward a narrow trail ahead, and Sarah strained her eyes until she saw what he'd spotted: 3 riders, too far away to identify but close enough to be a threat. Nalnish moved to her side with fluid quickness, his voice barely a whisper. Sutton's men, I recognize the gray horse. They are patrolling, looking for something or someone. We must hide, quickly. He led her off the trail into a jumble of boulders that barely seemed large enough to conceal them. But Nalnish positioned them with careful precision, using angles and shadows to maximum advantage. Sarah held her Moray's nose, murmuring soft reassurances to keep the animal quiet, while Nalnish crouched motionless as stone, watching the trail through a gap in the rocks. The riders came closer, and Sarah's breath caught as she recognized one of them, Chet Rawlings, one of the men Sutton had brought to her father's ranch. He was laughing about something, the sound carrying in the clear air, and the casual cruelty in his voice made her skin crawl. They were almost past when Sarah's moray shifted, a stone rolling under her hoof with a small but audible click. The riders stopped instantly, hands dropping to their weapons. You hear that? Rawlings called to his companions. Sounded like a horse. Sarah felt Nalnish tense beside her, saw his hand move to the knife at his belt. If it came to violence, they were outnumbered, but she knew he'd fight to protect her. The thought of him dying for her sake made something fierce and protective rise up in her chest. She wouldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let Sutton's men destroy this fragile alliance before it could bear fruit. One of the other riders, a lean man with a cruel face, pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Could be that McKenna girl. Boss said she's been acting suspicious lately, asking too many questions. Said, if we found her alone, we should make sure she understands the cost of interfering. The words confirmed Sarah's worst fears about Sutton's awareness and intentions. He knew she was a threat. He was actively hunting her. The danger was even more immediate than she realized. Beside her, Nalnish had gone completely still, but she could feel the violence coiled in him, ready to explode into action if needed. The riders moved closer to their hiding spot, searching the rocks with hard eyes. Sarah calculated distances and odds, knowing they were poor. 3 armed men against 1 Apache warrior and a woman with no weapon. Even Nalnish's considerable skills might not be enough. She pressed herself flatter against the rock, hardly daring to breathe, and felt Nalnish's hand find hers in the shadows, squeezing once in a gesture of solidarity and support. Then, miraculously, a rabbit burst from cover 20 yards away, startled by the horse's presence. It bounded across the trail in a flash of brown fur, and Rawlings laughed. "There's your horse sound, you nervous bastard, just a rabbit. Come on, we've got ground to cover before sundown." The riders moved on, their voices fading into the distance. Sarah and Nalnish remained frozen for long minutes after they disappeared, making absolutely certain they were gone. When Nalnish finally moved, releasing her hand and edging forward to check the trail, Sarah discovered she was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system in the aftermath of near discovery. "That was too close," she whispered when Nalnish returned, signaling that it was safe to move. "They're actively looking for me." "Sutton knows I'm a threat." "Then we must move faster. Be more careful," Nalnish replied, though she could see the concern in his eyes. "We are committed now, Sarah. There is no turning back. Sutton will not stop hunting you, and when he finds you, he will kill you or worse. Our only safety lies in exposing him before he can eliminate us." Sarah mounted her Mari with trembling hands, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Then let's make sure we reach Silver Creek before he catches us. We're not dying in these rocks, Nalnish. We're going to live long enough to see justice done and peace achieved, even if we have to fight the whole territory to do it." The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance, every sound scrutinized, every shadow examined for threats. But they made good progress, and when they camped that night, they were within striking distance of Silver Creek. One more day, maybe less, and Sarah could send her message to the federal marshal. One more day, and they'd have set in motion events that could save both their peoples or doom them all. As Sarah lay in her bedroll that night, staring up at the stars, she thought about trust and promises. She'd trusted Nalnish with her life, quite literally, and he hadn't failed her. He'd protected her, guided her, stood ready to die for her if necessary. The promise he'd made to stop fighting if she helped him achieve peace seemed more real and solid now, forged in shared danger and mutual dependence. She understood why she trusted him, even when everything in her upbringing said she shouldn't. It wasn't just because he'd saved her life, or because his cause seemed just. It was because he'd proven himself through action, shown himself to be a man of honor even when honor was difficult and dangerous. Tomorrow they'd reach Silver Creek. Tomorrow they'd take the next step in this improbable partnership. And whatever came after, whether success or failure, life or death, Sarah knew she wouldn't face it alone. She had an ally, a friend, perhaps something even more than that, though she wasn't ready to examine those feelings too closely yet. For now, it was enough to know that when she'd asked, "Will you stop if I ask?" Nalnish had answered with a promise that meant everything. Silver Creek was a rough town. The kind of place where questions weren't asked and strangers were common enough not to draw attention. Sarah rode in at midday, dusty and tired, but trying to project the confidence of a woman on ordinary business. Nalnish had positioned himself in the hills overlooking the town, close enough to intervene if there was trouble, but far enough away not to provoke a shooting. They'd agreed on signals if she needed help, she'd tie a red cloth to her saddle. If everything went smoothly, she'd leave town by the northern road and meet him at a predetermined canyon 3 miles out. The telegraph office was a cramped room attached to the general store. run by a nervous man with ink-stained fingers who barely looked up when Sarah entered. She'd prepared her message carefully during the ride, keeping it brief but urgent enough to command attention. Marshal Morrison stop evidence of conspiracy to incite Indian war for land profit, stop multiple deaths, stop request immediate investigation, Silver Creek territory, stop Sarah McKenna witness, stop. She paid the telegrapher with coins from her carefully hoarded savings and watched him tap out the message with methodical precision. Reply expected? The telegrapher asked without much interest. No, Sarah said. I'll be at the Morrison Ranch if there's a response. They can send a rider there. It was a lie, but a necessary one. She couldn't risk Sutton's men tracking her movements by monitoring telegraph replies. The telegrapher shrugged and filed the receipt. Sarah left quickly, her heart pounding. The first crucial step was complete. The message was sent, the machinery of federal justice set in motion. Now she just had to stay alive long enough for it to matter. She was leading her mare toward the northern road when she heard a familiar voice that made her blood run cold. Well, if it isn't Miss McKenna? Long way from home, Sarah turned slowly to find Chet Rawlings leaning against a hitching post, his smile as sharp as broken glass. He wasn't alone. 2 other men from Sutton's crew flanked him, their hands resting casually on their gun belts. The trap had been sprung so smoothly she hadn't seen it coming. "Mr. Rawlings," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "Fancy meeting you here. I'm just passing through on my way to the Morrison Ranch." "That so?" Rawlings pushed off the hitching post and sauntered closer. "Funny thing is, we got word you might be heading this way. Mr. Sutton was concerned about you, Miss McKenna. Said you've been asking uncomfortable questions, poking your nose where it don't belong. He sent us to make sure you got home safe. Wouldn't want anything to happen to old Jim McKenna's daughter, would we?" The threat was barely veiled, but they were in the middle of town with witnesses all around. Rawlings couldn't simply shoot her in the street, no matter what Sutton had ordered. Sarah had to hope that even in this rough territory there were limits to what men would do in broad daylight. "That's very thoughtful," Sarah said, keeping her tone light despite the fear churning in her gut. "But I can find my own way home. Please tell Mr. Sutton I appreciate his concern, but it's unnecessary." "Can't do that, Miss McKenna. Boss was very specific. We're to escort you back to your father's ranch, make sure you arrive safe and sound. He's worried about all these Apache raids, you see. Dangerous for a lady to be traveling alone." Rawlings moved to her mare's head, taking the reins from her hands with a proprietary gesture that made her want to slap him. "We'll just head out now, nice and friendly like. Unless you'd prefer to make a scene? Though I should warn you, these good folks in Silver Creek don't take kindly to hysterical women causing trouble." Sarah's mind raced through options. She couldn't fight 3 armed men. She couldn't appeal to the townspeople, who'd likely side with white men over a woman they didn't know. If she went with Rawlings, they'd take her somewhere isolated and kill her, probably make it look like an Apache attack to further Sutton's agenda. But if she refused and they grabbed her anyway, who would stop them? The red cloth, the signal for Nalnish. But could he take on 3 armed men in the middle of town without getting killed himself? And even if he tried, it would expose their partnership, destroy any chance of maintaining the secrecy they needed. Sarah felt panic rising in her throat, threatening to choke her. Then she saw the telegrapher emerge from his office, heading toward the saloon for his lunch break. He glanced at the confrontation, seemed about to ignore it, then stopped. His eyes met Sarah's for a brief moment, and something in her desperate expression must have communicated itself. The telegrapher paused, then called out loudly, "Excuse me, miss. You forgot your receipt for that telegraph. Need it if you're expecting a reply." It was a lifeline, a moment of intervention that broke the tension. Rawlings hesitated, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Telegraph? What telegraph?" Sarah seized the opportunity. "Just a message to the Morrison Ranch, letting them know I'd be delayed. I certainly wouldn't want Mrs. Morrison to worry and send people looking for me. She's very protective of her guests." She emphasized the last part, letting Rawlings understand that her absence would be noticed and questioned. The telegrapher, bless him, played along. "That's right, Mrs. Morrison's a fine lady. She have half the territory out looking if you don't show up when expected." He handed Sarah a piece of paper, probably just a random receipt. but the gesture sold the fiction. Rawlings exchanged glances with his men, calculating. Sarah could see the gears turning in his mind. If she disappeared now, with an expected arrival time at the Morrison Ranch, questions would be asked. The marshal might investigate. It would be messier than Sutton wanted. But if they let her go and she actually made it to the Morrison Ranch, she'd be surrounded by people, harder to eliminate quietly. "How long you planning to visit the Morrisons?" Rawlings asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Just a day or two," Sarah improvised. "Then I'll head straight home to my father's ranch. He's probably worried sick about me already." Another calculation flickered across Rawlings' face. If she was heading home in a few days, they could intercept her on the road between the Morrison Ranch and the McKenna spread. Isolated territory, easy to make her disappearance look like an accident or Apache attack. It was a more patient plan, but potentially cleaner. "Well then," Rawlings said, releasing her mare's reins with obvious reluctance. "You give our regards to Mrs. Morrison. We'll be seeing you real soon, Miss McKenna." "You can count on that." The promise was a threat, but Sarah forced herself to smile. "I'll look forward to it, Mr. Rawlings. Give my regards to Mr. Sutton. Tell him I appreciate his concern for my welfare." She mounted quickly before they could change their minds, fighting the urge to kick her mare into a gallop. She rode out of Silver Creek at a normal pace, feeling Rawlings' eyes on her back like gun sights. Only when she'd crested the first hill did she let out the breath she'd been holding, her hands shaking so badly she could barely control the reins. Nalnish materialized from the landscape like a ghost, running alongside her mare with urgent grace. I nearly came down when he took your reins, but I feared starting a gunfight in the middle of town would doom us both. Was I wrong? Did I fail you?" "No," Sarah said quickly, her voice shaking with reaction. "You did exactly right. A fight would have been disastrous. But Nalnish, they know I sent a telegraph. They'll be watching for the marshal's response. And they're planning to intercept me on the road home. Sutton won't let me live now, not when I've proven I'm actively working against him. Then we do not go to the Morrison Ranch, and we do not go to your father's ranch," Nalnish said firmly. "We go to ground, hide until the marshal arrives. We have bought ourselves time with your clever thinking, but only a little. We must use it wisely." They rode hard for the meeting canyon, putting distance between themselves and Silver Creek. When they reached the safety of the hidden ravine, Sarah finally let herself collapse, sliding from her mare on legs that barely held her weight. The enormity of what they'd set in motion crashed over her. There was no going back now. She'd sent the message, confronted Sutton's men, made herself a target that wouldn't be forgotten or forgiven. Nalnish caught her as her legs buckled, steadying her with gentle strength. "You were magnificent," he said quietly. "Brave and clever in equal measure. You out-hot them, bought us the time we needed." "Your mother would be proud," Sarah laughed shakily, the sound bordering on hysterical. "My mother would think I'd lost my mind, partnering with an Apache warrior to fight a conspiracy most people don't believe exists. But yes, she'd also be proud. She always said doing the right thing was rarely easy or safe." "Sarah," Nalnish said, his tone serious enough that she looked up to meet his eyes. "What you did today, the risk you took, the courage you showed, it means more than you know. My people have been fighting alone for so long, believing no white person would ever stand with us, that we are invisible to your justice. You have proven that wrong. Whatever happens next, whether we succeed or fail, you have given me something I thought lost hope that peace is possible." The intensity in his gaze made Sarah's breath catch. Something was shifting between them. Had been shifting since that first moment in the canyon when she'd asked her question and he'd given his promise. It was more than alliance, more than mutual respect. It was the beginning of something that had no name in either of their languages, but felt as real and solid as the stone beneath their feet. "We're going to succeed," Sarah said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "The marshal will come, we'll present our evidence, and Sutton will face justice. We're going to stop this war, Nalnish. I feel it in my bones." She hoped she was right. She hoped the promise they'd made to each other, the trust they'd built, would be strong enough to see them through what was coming. Because looking at Nalnish in the fading light, seeing the hope and determination in his eyes, Sarah realized she'd come to care about more than just peace between their peoples. She cared about him, this complex man who'd shown her that enemies could become allies and allies could become something more. The waiting began that night, tense and anxious, as they hid in the canyon and hoped the marshal would respond before Sutton's men found them. Sarah knew the next few days would determine everything: their lives, their people's futures, and the fragile bond that had formed between a cowgirl and an Apache warrior who'd dared to trust each other when trust seemed impossible. 4 days of hiding felt like 4 years. Sarah and Nalnish stayed in the canyon, taking turns on watch, rationing their supplies, and trying not to think about all the ways their plan could fail. Nalnish sent his youngest brother Cadlo to scout for news, and what Cadlo reported made their situation more desperate by the hour. Sutton had convinced Sarah's father that she'd been kidnapped by Apaches. McKenna was gathering every armed man in the territory for a massive raid on Apache camps. The territorial governor was using the kidnapping to justify calling in cavalry reinforcements. The powder keg they'd been trying to defuse was about to explode, and they were running out of time to prevent it. "We have to get word to my father," Sarah said urgently on the third day. "He needs to know I'm alive and safe, that I wasn't kidnapped. If he attacks your people thinking he's rescuing me, the bloodshed will be catastrophic." Nalnish shook his head grimly. "Your father will not believe an Apache messenger. He will think it is a trick, torture us for information about where you are, and if you show yourself to him, Sutton will kill you before you can speak. We are trapped in a situation where truth cannot reach those who need to hear it." It was Ishta, arriving with fresh supplies and intelligence, who brought the first ray of hope. "A man came to Silver Creek yesterday," she reported. "A federal marshal asking questions about a telegraph from Sarah McKenna. He seems interested, suspicious of the territorial governor's explanations. He has not left town yet, though Sutton's men watch him closely." "Morrison," Sarah breathed. He actually came. The relief was almost overwhelming. Their message had gotten through. The machinery of federal justice was engaged. They had a chance. "We must contact him," Nalnish said immediately. "Bring him here, show him the evidence, tell him the truth before Sutton can poison his mind with lies." "I'll go," Sarah decided. "He knows me, or at least he knew my father when things were better. He'll be more likely to trust me than an Apache messenger, as unfair as that is." "Too dangerous," Nalnish countered. "Sutton's men are hunting for you. You walk into Silver Creek, you'll be dead before you reach the marshal." They argued in circles until Ishta cut through the debate with characteristic directness. "You both go." Sarah approaches the marshal in town, but Nalnish watches from hiding, ready to intervene if Sutton's men try anything. "And I will be there too, with my rifle, because 3 sets of eyes are better than 2. We do this together or not at all." It was risky, but they were out of safe options. They rode for Silver Creek that night, arriving just before dawn. Cadlo had scouted the marshal's location, a room above the saloon, chosen perhaps for its defensive advantages, or maybe just because it was the best accommodation Silver Creek offered. Sarah waited until full daylight, when the town was awake and witnesses were plentiful, before she walked down the main street toward the saloon. She felt Nalnish's presence like a ghost on the rooftops, invisible but protective. Ishta had positioned herself with a rifle in the hayloft of the livery stable, able to cover the street if shooting started. The coordination spoke to the trust they'd built, the way they'd learned to work as a team despite coming from worlds that were supposed to be at war. Marshal Morrison was eating breakfast in the saloon when Sarah walked in. He was older than she remembered, perhaps in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen too much but still cared enough to try. His eyes widened when he saw her, recognition and surprise flickering across his features. "Miss McKenna?" He stood quickly, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun, then relaxing when he saw she was alone and unarmed. "We've been told you were kidnapped by Apaches. Your father is organizing a rescue party." "I wasn't kidnapped, Marshal," Sarah said clearly, pitching her voice to carry to the other patrons who'd stopped eating to watch. Witnesses. She needed witnesses. To what she was about to say? "I left voluntarily to contact you, to bring you evidence of a conspiracy to incite war between settlers and Apaches for profit. The man behind it is working for my father under a false name, and he's been trying to kill me since I discovered the truth." Morrison's hand moved to his gun again, but this time in readiness rather than threat. His sharp eyes scanned the saloon, noting the sudden tension, the way several men were paying too much attention. "Perhaps we should discuss this upstairs, Miss McKenna." "In private. With respect, Marshal, I prefer to stay public. The man I'm talking about, he calls himself Sutton here, has a history of making inconvenient witnesses disappear. I feel safer where there are plenty of eyes to see what happens to me." Morrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Tell me your story, Miss McKenna. And make it convincing, because I've got a territorial governor insisting you've been kidnapped and a dozen men ready to swear the Apaches in this region are murderous savages." Sarah took a deep breath and told him everything her encounter with Nalnish, the evidence of Sutton's conspiracy, the pattern of violence designed to profit from war, the 3 dead ranch hands whose murder was being blamed on Apaches. She spoke clearly and precisely, laying out facts and connections, making the case that a lawyer or investigator would find compelling. Morrison listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. When Sarah finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's quite an accusation, Miss McKenna. You're saying a man working for your father is deliberately starting a war to profit from land acquisition. That's a hanging offense if it's true. But it's also the kind of story an Apache might convince a naive girl to tell to protect themselves from justice for actual crimes." Sarah had expected skepticism, but the dismissal in his tone stung. "I'm not naive, Marshal, and I haven't been convinced of anything except by evidence in my own eyes. The man you call Sutton, I call him a murderer and a traitor. And I have documents to prove it, papers he didn't know were taken from dead men's pockets. Records of meetings between him and land speculators from back east, evidence that he's done this before in other territories." "Documents can be forged," Morrison countered. "Even if you have papers, how do I know they're genuine?" "How do I know you haven't been duped by clever forgeries?" "Because I know what my father's ranch records look like," Sarah said with steel in her voice. "I keep the books, Marshal. I know legitimate documents from fakes. And more than that, I know the truth when I see it. Sutton tried to have me killed in this very town 4 days ago. If I'm lying, why would he bother? If the Apaches are the real threat, why is he so determined to silence me?" Before Morrison could respond, the saloon doors swung open and Chet Rawlings walked in with 3 other men. His eyes locked on Sarah immediately, and his smile was the kind that made predators proud. "Well, Marshal, I see you found our missing lamb. Mr. McKenna will be relieved to know his daughter's alive. Though I have to wonder what stories she's been telling you. Poor girl's been through quite an ordeal. Sometimes trauma makes people confused, makes them say things that aren't quite right." Morrison's hand stayed near his gun, but his expression remained neutral. "Is that so? And you are?" "Chet Rawlings, foreman at the McKenna Ranch. Mr. Sutton sent me to help search for Miss Sarah. We've been real worried about her." Rawlings moved closer, his men fanning out in a way that looked casual but blocked the exits. "Why don't you come on home now, Miss Sarah? Your father's beside himself with worry. Whatever wild stories you've been telling the Marshal, we can straighten them out back at the ranch." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Sarah said flatly. "And Marshal Morrison is smart enough to see that you're trying to intimidate a witness. The question is, Marshal, are you going to let him?" The tension in the saloon ratcheted up to breaking point. Morrison's eyes moved between Sarah and Rawlings, calculating odds and possibilities. Sarah could see him weighing her story against the easier path of accepting Rawlings' explanation, of writing her off as a traumatized woman who didn't know her own mind. If he chose wrong, if he sided with Rawlings, everything would fall apart. Then a new voice cut through the standoff. "Perhaps I can clarify matters." Nalnish stood in the doorway, his appearance causing a ripple of shock and fear through the saloon. Several men reached for weapons, but Nalnish raised his empty hands, showing he was unarmed. "I am the Apache warrior called Ghost by your people. My true name is Nalnish, and I am Sarah McKenna's ally in exposing the conspiracy she describes. I have the documents she mentioned, taken from men who died trying to reveal the truth. I give them now to federal authority, hoping that justice can be achieved without more bloodshed." Rawlings' hand dropped to his gun. "Apache, in the middle of town, bold as brass. Marshal, you gonna let this savage stand here making threats?" "I threaten no one," Nalnish said calmly. Though Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders, the readiness to fight if necessary. I offer evidence and testimony. I offer truth in place of the lies that have been told about my people. Sarah McKenna asked me a question once. Will you stop if I ask? I promised her that I would work for peace instead of war if she would help me expose the men who profit from conflict. I am here to fulfill that promise, to stop fighting and start building peace if your justice will allow it. Morrison's hand was definitely on his gun now, but he hadn't drawn it. He was thinking Sarah could see, weighing the unprecedented situation against his training and experience. An Apache warrior voluntarily surrendering evidence, a rancher's daughter vouching for him, and men who were suspiciously eager to silence them both. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place in Morrison's mind, and Sarah held her breath hoping he'd see the pattern. "Everyone calm down," Morrison said finally, his voice carrying authority. "Rawlings, you and your men step back. Nobody's drawing weapons in here unless I say so, and you Nalnish, is it? You're either very brave or very foolish to walk in here. If what you're saying is true, you've got protection as a witness under federal law. If it's not true, you're under arrest for multiple murders and kidnapping. Either way, you're coming with me peacefully while we sort this out." "I agree to this," Nalnish said, his eyes finding Sarah's across the room. In that glance was everything they'd built together: trust, partnership, hope for a future beyond hatred. Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, telling him without words that she'd see this through, that she wouldn't let Morrison or anyone else dismiss what they'd discovered. "Like hell," Rawlings snarled, and his gun was suddenly in his hand, aimed at Nalnish. "That savage killed my friends," threatened Miss Sarah, and filled her head with lies. "I'm taking him in to the territorial governor for proper justice, and anyone who tries to stop me is interfering with—" The crack of a rifle shot shattered the standoff. Rawlings screamed, his gun flying from his hand as blood blossomed on his wrist. In the hayloft across the street, barely visible, Ishta lowered her rifle and chambered another round. Morrison's gun was out now, covering Rawlings' men before they could decide whether to fight or flee. "That's enough," Morrison said, his voice hard as iron. "I'm a federal marshal, and this is now a federal investigation. Anyone who interferes is obstructing justice and will be arrested. Rawlings, you and your men are going to sit down right here while I examine the evidence these people are offering. And someone get a doctor for that wrist, though personally I think that was some of the finest shooting I've seen disarmed him without killing him. That takes real skill." The next hours passed in a blur of testimony and evidence examination. Morrison proved to be thorough and fair-minded, listening to Sarah and Nalnish with equal attention, studying the documents Nalnish provided with a lawyer's eye for detail. He sent men to arrest Sutton at the McKenna Ranch, and when Sutton tried to resist, producing his own version of events and calling for the territorial governor's support, Morrison trumped him with federal authority and evidence too compelling to dismiss. The conspiracy unraveled with surprising speed once Morrison started pulling threads. Sutton, faced with irrefutable proof and the prospect of hanging, confessed everything to save his own neck. The territorial governor, confronted with evidence of his complicity, resigned in disgrace. And the land speculators back east who'd funded the whole operation found themselves facing federal charges that would tie them up in courts for years. When Sarah's father arrived in Silver Creek 3 days later, leading his rescue party, he found his daughter alive and well, standing beside a federal marshal and the Apache warrior he'd been taught to hate. The reunion was complicated, emotional, and not entirely comfortable. James McKenna struggled to reconcile the daughter he thought he knew with the woman she'd become, someone who'd partnered with an Apache to fight for justice rather than accepting the easy hatred of her upbringing. "You trusted him?" McKenna asked Sarah late one night, sitting in the marshal's office while the legal machinery ground on. "You trusted an Apache warrior with your life, your reputation, everything?" Sarah looked at her father, seeing the man he'd been before grief hollowed him out, and the man he might become again if he could find his way past the anger. "I asked him if he'd stop if I asked. He promised me he would, promised to work for peace instead of war. And he kept that promise, Dad. He risked everything to keep it. How could I not trust a man like that?" Nalnish, sitting quietly in the corner, met her eyes and smiled, a real smile. Warm and genuine, free from the weight of war for the first time since she'd known him. and I asked her if she would listen if I spoke. She promised she would, promised to see past the hatred to the truth. She has kept that promise as well. We are both bound by our words, and that bond has proven stronger than the forces that sought to destroy us. In the weeks that followed, peace didn't come easily or perfectly. There were still tensions, still prejudices and suspicions on both sides. But the cycle of violence was broken, the conspiracy exposed, and the path toward coexistence opened. The territorial government, under new leadership, began negotiating honestly with Apache leaders, including Standing Bear, whose wisdom helped bridge gaps that violence had widened. Sarah returned to her father's ranch, but she was different now, marked by her experiences in ways both visible and invisible. She and Nalnish continued to work together, her as a liaison to the white community, him as a voice for his people, building the framework for a peace that might actually last. They met regularly, ostensibly to discuss policy and implementation, but everyone knew it was more than that. They'd forged something in the fire of shared danger that couldn't be easily categorized or dismissed. "People talk," Sarah's father said one evening, watching Nalnish ride away after one of their meetings. "They say it's not proper, you spending so much time with him. They say it will hurt your reputation, make you unmarriageable." Sarah smiled, thinking about the question that had started everything and the promise that had changed her world. "Let them talk, Dad. I'm not interested in marrying someone who can't see past skin color to character. And as for reputation, I'd rather be known as the woman who helped stop a war than the woman who stayed silent and proper while people died." McKenna was quiet for a moment, then surprised her by putting his hand on her shoulder. "Your mother would have been proud. Hell, I'm proud, even if it took me too long to say it. You saw truth where I saw only enemies, and you had the courage to act on it. That's more than most people manage in a lifetime." 6 months after that confrontation in the Silver Creek Saloon, Sarah stood at the edge of her father's land, watching the sun set over territory that was finally at peace. Nalnish rode up beside her, his presence as natural as breathing now, and together they looked out over the land they'd fought to protect. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "Giving up the warrior's path? Choosing peace when war was all you'd known?" Nalnish considered the question seriously, as he did everything. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of it, the clear purpose. But then I remember the promise I made you and the future we are building together, and I know I chose correctly. Peace requires more courage than war, Sarah. It is harder to build than to destroy, harder to trust than to hate. But it is worth the difficulty. Someone once told me that hatred is easier than understanding, but that easy paths often lead to hard endings," Sarah said, echoing words Nalnish had shared with her during their journey. "I think we chose the hard path, but it's leading somewhere worth going." Nalnish reached out and took her hand, the gesture no longer scandalous but simply right, two people who'd found in each other something worth more than the prejudices of their peoples. "When you asked me if I would stop if you asked, I made you a promise. I have kept that promise. But I want to make you another promise now, if you will accept it." Sarah's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "What promise is that?" "I promise to stand with you, not just in this moment, but in all the moments to come. To build this peace we have started, to face whatever challenges arise, to prove that the trust between us can be a foundation for trust between our peoples. I promise to be your partner, your ally, your friend, and if you will allow it, something more than that. I promise to honor you, respect you, and love you in the way you deserve, completely, honestly, without reservation." Tears stung Sarah's eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that came from joy rather than grief. "I asked you once if you would stop if I asked, and you promised you would. Now I'm asking you something different. Don't stop. Don't stop building this peace. Don't stop trusting in what we've created. Don't stop being the man who had the courage to make promises and keep them. And don't stop," she paused, gathering courage for words that would change everything. "Don't stop loving me, because I've fallen in love with you too, against all sense and reason, and I wouldn't have it any other way." Nalnish pulled her close, and when he kissed her, it felt like a promise fulfilled, a future claimed. A peace sealed not just with words, but with the kind of love that could bridge any divide. Around them, the sunset painted the sky in colors that belonged to no single people but to the land itself, vast and beautiful and finally, hopefully, moving toward peace. The journey that had started with a question, "Will you stop if I ask?" had led them to this moment, this promise, this future they would build together. Sarah had trusted in Apache Warrior's promise because she'd seen in his eyes the same thing he'd seen in hers. The courage to choose hope over hatred, peace over war, love over fear. And that trust had changed everything, not just for them, but for all the people whose futures depended on whether enemies could become allies, and allies could become something more. As darkness fell over the territory, Sarah and Nalnish stood together, hands clasped, looking toward a tomorrow they would face as partners. The cowgirl who'd asked a question and the Apache warrior who'd made a promise had found in each other the answer to the most important question of all: could two people from different worlds find common ground in trust, build a future in peace, and prove that love was stronger than the forces that sought to divide them? The answer, written in the clasped hands and shared smiles of a rancher's daughter and an Apache warrior, was yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. And that answer, that promise kept and renewed, would echo through generations, a reminder that the hardest paths often lead to the most beautiful destinations, and that trust, once truly earned, can change the world.